Now after terrestrial biomes, we also have to consider the aquatic biomes. Now when we talk about aquatic biomes, there is a little difference when we consider the different classifications of biome. For example, when we talk about the terrestrial biomes, the first thing that we discuss is about the vegetation. And vegetation becomes a big factor of differentiation when you talk about the different kinds of terrestrial biomes. But if we consider the aquatic biomes, if you talk about the producer that you have in an aquatic biome, the producer primarily is always algae. You don't have trees, you don't have herbs, you don't have shrubs, you don't have different kinds of trees and every kind of plant. You have a very similar kind of vegetation that is observed, but this kind of a classification is normally done on the basis of depth below the water level, then on the basis of salinity of the water body, then also on the basis of water movement, whether there is a water movement or not, and if there is a water movement, what kind of water movement exists. So these are the kinds of factors that determine the kind of aquatic biome. But when we consider the terrestrial biomes, the classifications that we observe, they are mostly on the basis of what? Mostly on the basis of temperature, climatic conditions, precipitation. All these are the factors that are considered there. But these kind of factors are not considered when we discuss the aquatic biomes. So let's have a look at the different kinds of aquatic biomes that we have and then try to understand one by one about each one of them. The major ones that we have are, first, we can club them as streams and rivers. Then you have lakes, you have the wetlands, you have estuaries, and you have oceans. So these are the major biomes for the aquatic ones. So let's discuss the flowing water or streams and rivers first. Now when we talk about flowing water, there are two kinds of biomes that you have here. One is stream and the other one is river. Now when we talk about stream, when will they be formed? It's very simple. Whenever you see that precipitation is more than evaporation. If precipitation is more than evaporation and the water has a way to flow through the land, then in that case what will happen is formation of stream will happen. And many such streams can join together to ultimately form a river, right? So these are the two kinds of systems which are also called as lotic systems. So these are two kinds of biomes where you will see that there are certain differences. For example, when we talk about streams, so normally you will see that the streams will flow through rocks, it will flow very fast, it will fall down and it will form a pool of water at some places. So all these places, what happens is whenever it is flowing through the rocks, it is called as riffles, and wherever the pool kind of situation is formed, it is called as pool. Now what happens with riffles is it has access to sunlight, but the depth is very shallow, movement is very fast, and because of that the vegetation cannot grow here or any aquatic organism cannot be formed here. So this can be said to be a region where you will not see much of species. Then even if you come to the pool, what happens in the pool is, yes, there is the depth that is required, but because of this depth, what happens is the sunlight is not able to reach, and sunlight is also not able to reach the bottom or even the surface just below the water level because of the fact that a lot of silt has been created. A lot of silt has been collected from the flow of the stream and ultimately it has been collected at the pool. So because of which what will be observed is neither in the riffles nor in the pools, in both the two places, the vegetation, the species diversity, etc. will be very low. But as you start to go downstream, what starts to happen is that more nutrients will start to get collected, the flow will become much steadier, then sunlight will be in ample amount, also the water now becomes warmer. So because of all these factors, normally what we'll observe is that rivers will always have a better vegetation support. They can support more species, both plants as well as aquatic animals. So because of all these reasons, we'll see that normally rivers will always be having a better species diversity. So if we look at some of the important points, first of all, we use the term lotic system whenever we talk about flowing water. Then when we go downstreams, what happens with the nutrients and how the things change we have discussed. Then the stream depends on leaves and other organic matter that fall or washes onto the stream from the surrounding vegetation for its nutrients. Also one more point is that when we talk about the lotic systems will have a live interaction with the terrestrial ecosystem as well. When you talk about any terrestrial biome which exists, all these terrestrial biomes will always see some water flowing from land into the lotic systems, and because of that a lot of organic material will be collected from these terrestrial biomes and they will be then given to the aquatic biomes. So these aquatic biomes, especially speaking about the lotic systems, we see that lotic systems tend to collect a lot of its nutrients and organic matter from the terrestrial biomes which are in the surrounding areas. So this is something that has been observed. Now, one more important factor that we need to consider here is about construction of dams. When we talk about construction of dams, this is a kind of disruption that happens to lotic systems. When we talk about lotic systems, these are the most vulnerable kind of biomes to any disruption that will be done to their flow. So when you construct a dam, what happens? First of all, the flow of river is disrupted. Secondly, there will be huge amount of sedimentation that will happen. And then at the same time, there will be change in temperature of the river system as well. So because of all these reasons, all the aquatic animals, all the aquatic plants, they will now have to find ways to adapt to these situations. And more often than not, they are not able to. So what is happening? First of all, their habitat fragmentation is happening. That's one very big reason for them not to able to survive. Then apart from that, all these disruptions that are happening. For example, behind the dam, you will see that a lot of sedimentation will happen, a lot of silt will be collected. Because of this, we will see that a lot of aquatic animals and plants that are supposed to live there, they will not be able to survive anymore. Why? Because of this siltation, sunlight is not able to reach the bottom of the surface, and because of that, all these animals and plants which survive at the bottom of the surface will not be able to survive anymore. That's one. Then there are many aquatic animals which have to flow upstream and downstream. They always keep on swimming upstream and downstream. Their flow has been disrupted. Many a times for reproduction, to lay their eggs also, they need certain areas that are not provided anymore to them. Then after that, temperature changes. One side will become warmer, the other side will become colder. So again, there will be adaptation that will be required for all these aquatic organisms. Then after that, one more thing that is observed is that the amount of oxygen, the concentration of oxygen downstream will be lesser. And because of this, again, because of lesser amount of oxygen availability, there will be lesser amount of nutrients that will be present here. And because of this, again, the organisms living downstream will perhaps face some issue. All these are the kinds of things that we see. But we know that this becomes one of the big reasons for us to consider whenever any construction of a new dam is supposed to happen. Because any lotic system will be hugely affected, gravely affected whenever a construction of a dam happens for any given reason. Whether it is to stop flooding, whether it is to produce more power, generate hydroelectricity, for all these reasons, whenever we do it, it becomes a big challenge for us to sustain the kinds of biome that exists in the lotic systems. So this is about the lotic systems and the flowing water. Now the next system that we need to consider are the systems of standing water. And there we need to look at a different kind of a biome, which is in the form of a pond or in the form of a lake. Now when we talk about the lakes and the ponds, how are they different from the rivers? Very simple terms, the flow of water. What we see in a river is that there will be a flow of water that will keep on happening perennially. But when you talk about lakes and ponds, these are the kinds of biomes where you will not see any kind of flow happening. They will be formed due to various reasons. They can be formed due to retreat of glaciers, or they can be formed due to any of the geological activities that have happened. For example, you can take the Great Rift Valley of Africa. So here this has been formed because of the geological activities that have happened in that region. Then after that, there are also oxbow lakes. Right? You might have read about them in your geography lessons. So you know that they will be formed whenever you have a very broad river system where, because of the meandering of the rivers, you see that oxbow lakes are formed. So there are these kind of various reasons because of which we will see the formation of a lake or a pond. So there can be any depression in which lakes and ponds can be formed. Many of them will be seasonal. You will see that wherever there is water stress, they may dry out, and then again they will be filled with water whenever there is the other precipitation season. So all these kind of things have been observed with respect to lakes and ponds. One important thing to know about the lakes and ponds are the zones into which they are divided. There are horizontal divisions that we can do, and there is a possibility of doing a vertical division as well. Because when you talk about them, what happens is all these layers that we have, whether horizontally or vertically, all these layers will have different kind of ecosystem because of the fact that amount of sunlight availability changes, the temperature of water changes, the amount of sedimentation or amount of silt present changes. So because of all these changes that we see in the physical features, we'll see that there are various ways in which these ecosystems can be divided, but entirely they can be called as a biome. So when you talk about the horizontal division, first you have the littoral zone, and littoral zone is the zone which is very near to the land water boundary. This kind of region is called as littoral zone. Then after, when you start to move towards the open waters, this is where the second zone, that is limnetic zone, comes into the picture. And then once you move towards the deeper parts of the lakes, this is where you have the third zone, which is called as the benthic zone. So these are the three ways in which the horizontal divisions are done. So when you talk about the littoral zone, this is a zone where a lot of terrestrial organisms will also come in contact with the organisms which are aquatic. Water lilies, for example, will be found in these kind of regions. Then after that, when you move towards the limnetic zone, this is where you have open waters. So for example, phytoplanktons, algae, etc. can be found in these regions. Then after that, once we move into the benthic zone, this becomes the zone which has lesser amount of sunlight available. So what will happen is the number of plant species will now be lesser, but aquatic animals can be found in this particular region. So this is how we normally divide the zones horizontally. Then when we talk about vertical division, there are two ways in which vertical division is done. One is epilimnion and the second is hypolimnion. So epilimnion is the one which has more amount of sunlight available to it, and hypolimnion is the one which has lesser amount of sunlight available to it. That is, when we talk about vertically, the first part that we have, that is epilimnion, and the bottom part is called as the hypolimnion. So this is how we vertically divide the lake. So let's look at the important points with respect to ponds and lakes. First of all, we give the term lentic system to it. Why? Because of the fact that it is standing water. Then when we talk about the depression because of which this will be formed, as we discussed, it can be of glacial origin, it can be fault zones, it can even be meteor impact or the human excavation activities. All these can lead to it. Then apart from that, there are other factors also that we discussed. For example, the oxbow lake. So oxbow lake, as you know, they are being formed naturally because of the change in the course of broader rivers. Then after that, when we talk about horizontal division, it can be littoral zone, it can be limnetic zone, or which is also called as pelagic zone, and also you have the benthic zone at the bottom. That is towards the open waters. We are moving towards the open water. And when we talk about the vertical division, as I said, there can be epilimnion and hypolimnion. These are the two ways in which vertical division can be done. And then after that, ultimately what happens is, for most of the lakes, it will be seen that there will be sedimentation that will keep on increasing over the years, and with the increase in sedimentation, ultimately there is a possibility that first it will start to move towards wet meadows, and then ultimately they may convert into a terrestrial ecosystem. So we have learned something about the same fact in the ecosystem succession as well. So this is what happens to lakes and ponds. Then after that, we have wetlands. So when we talk about wetlands, these are the areas where terrestrial and aquatic biomes come together, right? So these are regions where you will see that soil will be completely saturated with water, and the vegetation that will be found here, the kinds of plants that grow here, these will be the kinds of vegetation which are able to survive in low oxygen concentrations as well. So in anoxic conditions, they can grow. So that's why the kinds of plants and vegetation that are found here, they will not be found in any other biome. They will be very specific to this kind of biome. Now, based on where they are found, whether they are based on fresh water or they are based on saline water or marine ecosystem, you will see that there are various kinds of wetlands. For example, you can talk about swamps, you can talk about marshes and bogs. These three will become the part of freshwater ecosystem or freshwater biome. And when we talk about the others, for example, salt marshes and mangroves, these are the wetlands which are associated with the marine environment. So depending on where they are found, depending on what kind of water they are able to grow upon, you will see that there are various classifications that we can do for wetlands as well. Then after that, as I said, the vegetation in this ecosystem will be able to tolerate low oxygen concentration as well. Now, one very important fact about the wetlands is the fact that they are able to protect us against the tropical cyclones. They form a very good barrier against all these tropical cyclones that may hit the coastal areas. So their presence becomes very, very important. But what we have seen over the past few years is because of climate change, because of expansion in the urban settlements. Because of all these reasons, we have seen that there has been a steady decline in the areas that have been occupied by wetlands all over the world. So this is something that can be very dangerous for us in the coming years. Now the next biome that we need to discuss are estuaries. So when we talk about estuaries, this is a point where there is a salt water and fresh water mix. That is, the rivers which have been flowing through the terrestrial biomes, they have now come towards their end, and now they are going to mix with the marine ecosystems. So this is where there will be a unique combination of fresh water and salty water. Now what also happens at these places is that they are able to sustain a large number of species. Why? Because first of all, there is a large number of nutrients that is available here, all the nutrients that have been carried by the river. Apart from that, there is no water stress. So because of these two reasons, we see that there is a unique ecosystem that builds here, and that's why we see this as a completely separate biome. Now, when we talk about estuaries, first of all, as I said, these are found at the mouth of rivers where fresh water and salt water interact. The presence of high nutrient content supports extremely high biological productivity, and at the same time, they are edged with tidal marshes in the temperate regions and mangroves in the tropical regions. So this is about estuaries. So if you look at this particular picture, you'll understand what estuaries look like. You see that mouth of the river is now coming into contact with the marine ecosystems, and this is where the estuaries will be found. So that's why they will also lead to the formation of marshes. So this is about estuaries. Now from here we are going to move into marine biomes. Until now we have been looking at the freshwater biomes, where we have looked into the different kinds and how they can be classified with the help of flow of water, temperature, where they are found, etc. Now, towards the last part of this particular chapter, we come to the marine aquatic systems. And when we talk about marine aquatic systems, we will have a different set of biomes that are present here. These are the biomes which are different for the fact that these are based on salt water, water which is saline. When you talk about the freshwater biomes, you know that the salinity is very, very low. But when you come to this region where the marine aquatic systems come, these are the regions with high salinity. So the kinds of vegetation, the kinds of organisms that will be able to survive here, they will also be very different from the ones that we saw for the freshwater biomes. And when it comes to the division or the classification that we do for the marine aquatic systems, again it is done either from where you left the land, what was the last point on the land that we had, and then maybe on the basis of the vertical division. So again there will be horizontal and a vertical division, as we saw for the lentic zones as well. So let's have a look at this particular system. So first of all, you will have the littoral zone. So when we talk about the littoral zone, this is basically the zone where you have the difference between high tide and low tide. So that particular region between the high tide and the low tide will be called as the littoral zone. Then after that, once you start to move towards open waters, you have the neritic zone. So then for the next 200 meters or so, we'll have the neritic zone. So this is where the open waters start. Then after that, once the depth starts to increase from more than 200 meters and it can go much beyond that, then starts the oceanic zone. In the oceanic zone, the bottom surface of the oceanic zone will be called as the benthic zone. So littoral zone and benthic zones are something that we already saw. So very similar classification is being done here as well. Now, until the point where the neritic zone ends, this is something which is also called as the continental shelf, because after 200 meters or so, usually it is seen that there will be a huge drop, and because of this huge drop, now we come to the next classification, and that is oceanic zone. Now, if we talk about the vertical classification, it can be done on the basis of how much of sunlight is available. So on the basis of that, we see that it is classified into photic zone and aphotic zone. Photic zone where sunlight is amply available, and aphotic zone where sunlight is not that available. And towards the bottom of the ocean, anyway, there is almost no sunlight that is present. So that's why the kinds of organisms that will survive there will be completely different as compared to the ones that you see near the surface waters. So when we talk about the marine ecosystems, first of all, they form the largest proportion of the Earth's surface. Then the factors that will determine the kind of marine ecosystem that you have in these biomes will be factors like temperature, or you can talk about the depth of the ocean, the ocean currents. All these kind of factors become a very prominent thing for these kind of the marine ecosystem. Then again, as we discussed, first of all you have the littoral zone, then you have the neritic zone, then you have the oceanic zone, and on the basis of the penetration of light, you have the photic and the aphotic zone. Now this is a basic way of how we classify different kinds of biomes that are present here. Apart from that, there is another division that was done by World Wildlife Fund, and that is on the basis of high productivity. And if you look at these 5 biomes which were devised by WWF, these are polar shelf and seas, you have temperate shelves, you have the temperate upwelling, tropical upwelling, and the tropical coral reefs. These are the 5 areas of very high productivity, and these are the 5 biomes that were named by WWF to be the highest productive biomes. Now, very important one here is the coral reef. So when we talk about coral reefs, first of all, we know that these are found in the tropical regions. You will see that the temperatures will be above 20 degrees Celsius all year round, and these become regions of high productivity. When you talk about this particular biome, this is a biome which is among the most diverse of all the biomes that are present on the earth. We are not only talking about the aquatic biomes, we are also talking about the terrestrial biomes. They are comparable to the rainforest, the tropical rainforests that we discussed. So they are able to sustain a large number of producers, a large number of consumers. Because of that, they show a very good biodiversity in all these regions. Now, talking about the coral reefs also have been the regions which have been widely affected by climate change. We know that because of rising ocean temperatures, these have not been able to survive because they need a very specific temperature range. And if this temperature range does not exist, if the temperature rises above that, they start to die off very quickly. And this is something that we have observed in the last couple of decades. So these are also the things which have to be kept in mind while talking about coral reefs, and this is something that we'll keep talking about. And also in geography, you have already read about coral reefs. So this is something that brings me to the end of this particular chapter on the various kinds of biomes, various kinds of terrestrial and the aquatic biomes. Most of the questions, as I said, are to be expected in your prelims examination. In the mains examination, I do not expect a direct question to come from here, but all the important characteristics that we saw for a given biome, they have to be kept in mind. So with this, I end this chapter. Thank you very much for joining.